Hello world, Mate here. Today I'll be demonstrating CS50g's first project, FiftyBird, and my solution to it. So first off, we need to randomize the gaps between pipes, so they're no longer hard-coded to 90 pixels. Second, we need to randomize the interval at which pipe pairs spawn, so it's not hard-coded to 2 seconds. Next, we need to reward the player with a medal, 3 different ones for each of the player's progress. And lastly, we need to implement a pause feature, with which a player can pause the game by simply pressing P. Okay, so let's begin. First off, I want to talk about my changes to the Main.lua file. So the first change is at line 48, where I set a boolean pause value and set it to false by default. It's a global value, which means it will be used in all .lua documents. And right next to it, I implement a scrolling boolean value and set it to true. So the paused value will basically keep track of whether the game has been paused or not, and the scrolling value determines whether the background should scroll or not. Pretty simple. The next change is at line 94 here, where I implement the pause sound, which will play when the player pauses the game. Next change is at line 164. We basically set an if statement. So if the scrolling value is equal to true, then obviously the background should scroll. So if the scrolling is set to false, the background will no longer scroll. We'll later use this feature to make the game pause. Okay, I think that's about it with main. Let's head to pipe pair, where we actually have the solution to the gap problem. So previously we had a default gap height value that was set hard-coded to 90 pixels. So instead of that, when the pipes are generated, instead of the pipes, we can just set the gap, which was 90 previously here, to a random value between 75 and 100 and 110. And that's basically the solution I came up with for the gap problem. And that's about it with the pipe pair document. Next, let's head to the solution for the reward system for the player, which is coded in the score state file. First, we begin by initializing 3 local values, which hold the images of our medals. Next up, on line 40, we actually implement the logic behind the player receiving medals and how much score he has to have to receive the medals. On the staff's request, I've made it pretty easy to receive the medals, so you can playtest them. So you can playtest the game fairly easily, and that's my solution to the player reward system. Next, let's head to the play state, where we actually implement most of the challenging aspects of this problem set. So first off, the first change is at line 20, when we implement a spawn interval, which is set to a random value between 1.7 and 2.7. Next up, on line 32, we have a paused image value. This value basically holds the image that will display when the player has paused the game. Then on line 37, we have if paused is equal to false, then we can go on with the update logic in player.lua. On line 42, we actually implement the spawn interval feature, where we spawn pipes on random values. So the spawn interval, recall, was set to a random value between 1.7 and 2.7. So if the timer exceeds this value, then we spawn pipes. In this statement, we also update the spawn interval. This has the effect of constantly updating it, so we don't have repetition of the same spawn interval value. Next up, we have the pause feature. So first off, we need to keep track of whether the player has pressed the P button. If pause is equal to false, that means we're playing the game. So if we press the P button when the game is running, then we execute this logic. So we basically set the pause value to true. Scrolling is set to false, so the background will stop moving. Then we call the pause sound and we stop the music. So this basically has the effect of pausing the game. Else if the pause value is true, so if the player clicks P and we were paused, so we were in the pause state and the player clicks P, then we set the scrolling value to true, pause to false, because we are effectively entering the play state, and we resume the music. That's basically the whole logic behind the pause state. The last change I made in order to solve this problem set was inside the play state render function, where I call an if statement. So if the game is paused, then we can load all the graphics needed for the pause state, which are basically, we set the font to Flappy font, which recall was the second biggest font, and we press P to resume. We have an image scale value, which is set to 0.22. Then we actually draw the image, and that's all the code I have for this problem set. This was my solution to it. Now we can transition into gameplay. Okay, so this is the pause feature. As we can see, we have a big pause button on the middle of the screen, and press P to resume. We played a sound effect and paused the music at the same time. So now we can clearly see the intervals between spawning pipes here and here, which is a pretty big difference. We can also see a difference between the gap width here and here. Now we can simply resume the game and showcase the reward feature.